Hello, welcome to discussion week 8. So we didn't have a discussion last week. I didn't post the discussion video because last week was our midterm, and I saw that last week's the materials from 2 weeks ago were actually talking about deadweight loss and steel tax, and we actually covered it from the discussion video 2 weeks ago. So I didn't post anything new, and I'm afraid that I'm gonna just again surpass whatever the professor is gonna talk this week. So I decided to just skip it 1 week and also just let you have some breaks for the after the midterm. So this week we're gonna summarize whatever you learned from last week. It's the cost of production. So from the first half of the quarter, we've mainly focused on the demand side and talk about also supply side a little bit maybe, and we also introduced you the demand supply curves, and then we also try to find the equilibrium from the market. This is that was a more general approach to study the market, right? We want to touch a little bit on both sides and then try to see, okay, what is the equilibrium price and what is the equilibrium quantity. And right now we're trying to focus more on the supply side, trying to dig a little bit deeper to see how the market is affected by the suppliers and how suppliers are actually responding to certain changes in their own companies, because we all know that at least in the economic sense or in the standard economics models, all of the economics agents are trying to maximize their profits, right? So as a firm, they want to maximize their profits, or maybe to be precise, economic profits, right? Then when you're trying to maximize your economic profits, you need to take into consideration costs. There is no free labor, there is no free input, right? Even as a company, even as a supplier or producer, you need to buy the raw materials or hire your employees, right? You can't just be like using free labors. That's slavery. That's a different story. So right now, we need to take into consideration of the cost when you're producing goods. So we always, like I said before, whenever we introduce something that we may cause some change, we always want to draw out the original graph. As long as you know the original graph, then you can easily just manipulate it or shift it up and down to see which curve is going to affect it, which curve is shifting which way or moving which way when you're trying to solve the problems. So when we deal with costs, the first step is again trying to draw the cost curves. And be very careful. This is not a supply and demand curve. This is not a graph that's about market, but a graph about a specific company, because you couldn't really calculate the entire cost of the cost of the entire market, right? We couldn't just simply say the average total cost for this market. This market can consist can contain a lot of other companies, right? Let's say we're talking about cell phone companies, then we probably have Apple, we probably have Samsung, we probably have many other cell phone companies, right? It's just impossible for us to say the average total cost for this market is X, Y, and Z. But we can easily get data from a specific company. So whenever we're talking about cost of production, we're always talking about the cost of a specific company. At least for now, this is what we're trying to do, okay? So when we ask you draw the cost graphs or cost curves of a blah 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 company, the first step is always to keep in mind that we're drawing out the cost for the company. On the x-axis is still quantity. On the y-axis, instead of price, it's actually cost. Because again, we're not dealing with the market anymore. We're not trying to find the equilibrium price or equilibrium quantity. So on the y-axis, it's not price. So you need to be very careful about labels. Okay. And from the lectures we already know, I'm not gonna repeat it again. We usually have downward sloping average fixed cost, and it's usually strictly decreasing, right? And it makes sense, right? Because the fixed cost means no matter how many units or how many goods you're going to produce, the fixed cost doesn't change, right? So the more you produce, the average fixed cost is only going to decrease, right? Because say you have $100 as your fixed cost. The more you have, the more goods you produce. At the beginning, if you only produce one good, then the average fixed cost is 100, right? But if you produce two, three, the more you have, the lower average fixed cost. So the average fixed cost is strictly decreasing. And then the average variable cost, it's downward sloping at the beginning and upward sloping in the end. And average total cost is very similar to the average variable cost, downward sloping at the beginning and then upward sloping at the end. And marginal cost, relatively similar as well, downward sloping at the beginning and upward sloping in the end. So this is actually how we draw all of the graphs. I mean, all of the curves, and I think average total cost, average variable cost, marginal cost, average fixed cost. So I think we have all of the cost curves here, and that's it. This is the original graph for the cost curves. Okay, and now we want to think about the changes, and let me give you a concrete example. Use blue, say a component X is producing goods, and let's name it Y. It's producing goods. Doesn't matter. It's trivial. These are trivial details. What I want to ask in this case is, if we increase the rental cost of the factory, which curve should change? In which way? So again, we already know. I'm just going to use this original graph, okay? So we already know this is my original graph. Oh, maybe the average total cost curve should be a little bit... Yeah, I think this is bad. So we already know the... So we already know this is the original graph, and now we're trying to see which curve is going to be affected if we change the rental cost. And in this case, I'm saying the rental cost is increasing. If we increase the rental cost, and we need to first think about what is the rental cost, which category the rental cost should go to, right? Is it a total cost? Is it a total cost? Is it a variable cost? Is it a marginal cost? Is it a fixed cost? In fact, we know one thing for sure. It must belong to total cost, right? Because total cost means we're adding up everything, right? So if it is a change in whatever cost, the total cost must be affected. So I know one thing for sure. Total cost will be affected. But is that all? Actually, no, right? Because rental cost doesn't just only affect total cost. If it's affecting total cost, it means it's one of the two costs. Either it's variable cost or fixed cost. And think about rental cost. Rental cost means it's fixed cost, right? It doesn't mean that the more goods you're producing, the higher rental cost you're gonna pay. If you're renting a factory, you're renting it with the static monthly rent. It doesn't change because of if you're increasing your production. It only changes if your landlord tells you that right now I'm gonna change the rental cost and I'm gonna increase it or decrease it. I'm gonna charge you whatever dollars, right? So it's fixed, at least for a certain period. Maybe for this month, maybe for this year. And if we are increasing it, which cost we're increasing? It's fixed cost, right? So fixed cost will be affected. And we already know we're increasing the cost. So in this case, it's not as confusing as demand curve or supply curve shift to the left, shift to the right, or shift up, shift down. Once we're increasing a cost, the curves must shift up, right? So to show it on the graph, we know that average fixed cost is increasing. FC prime, it is shifting up. And average total cost, similarly, also increases. Average total cost prime. And sorry, I keep changing average total cost because you should probably you probably know why I keep redrawing the average total cost, right? Because in the lecture we mentioned that average total cost must intersect with marginal cost at its lowest point. So I'm always trying. I know I'm a really bad drawer. Like I'm just trying to find the lowest point of the average total cost curve and I'm trying making it intersect with the marginal cost. And that's it. So maybe we can keep considering whether it changes the average variable cost. Well, it's not, right? Because I already mentioned the rental cost is the same. It doesn't really change along with the quantity of the goods you're producing. It only changes when the landlord is telling you that they're going to charge you more or charge you less, right? So in this case, it's pretty easy to decide which curve is going to affect and which way they're shifting. In the second example, still the same company. Company X producing goods Y, again trivial details, and now the cost of hiring laborers increases. Which curve is affected and in which way? For now, we should already know, as long as it's increasing, alright? The cost is increasing, okay? Then in which way? It's already decided. It must be shifting up. The only thing we need to consider is which curve is or are affected. So again, the first step is always to draw the original graph. So once we draw the original graph, and I have to label it. Once I draw the original graph, I have to decide which curve is affected. Again, if it's cost, average total cost must be affected. And I already know average total cost is going to increase, right? But let me just wait a second and think about other curves that may be affected. Because I know that average total cost needs to intersect with marginal cost at the lowest point, right? What if the marginal cost is changing? I don't want to draw the average total cost first. I want to draw the marginal cost first and then decide average total cost, right? So let me check if the marginal cost is increasing. Well, we know that marginal cost is changing if this cost is affected by the quantity, right? And does this cost affect by the quantity? It does, right? Because the more I want to produce, the more employees I have to hire, right? I couldn't use one employee to produce infinite amount of goods. The more I want to make or craft or manufacture, the more labor I have to hire, right? And if the cost of hiring labor increases, then it's a variable cost, right? So as long as this cost is affecting as long as this cost is affecting variable cost, it's affecting marginal cost because both of these two costs are affected by the quantities. So labor is a very classical example. Labor is affected by the goods produced quantities. Just like I said, the more you want to produce, the more labor you need to hire. The less you want to produce, well, you're gonna have some labor cut, or maybe just lay off some workers, right? So now we know that average variable cost is affected, average total cost is affected, marginal cost is affected. We need to decide either average fixed cost is affected. Well, is it a fixed cost? It's not, right? Because this labor is increasing, labor cost is increasing when you actually hire more. If you don't change, if you stay with your current production, then you don't need to hire more. Then your cost doesn't change. So as long as it's affecting by the quantity you're producing, then it's not a fixed cost. So average fixed cost curve is not affected in this case. And let's draw the changes. We know that average variable cost is increasing. ABC prime. We know that the marginal cost is increasing. Marginal cost prime. And we know the average total cost, again, I'm trying to find the lowest point, is increasing. And I know it's messy, but it's natural that when you have so many curves in one graph, it's naturally going to become messy. So again, I don't think we're going to ask you to draw anything in the on the final or in any assignments, because it's just simply impossible when we're doing everything remotely. But it doesn't hurt for you to know how to draw these graphs. You can practice. May help you when if you're an econ major, you're probably gonna take econ 100A. It may help you in the future, in the long run. Okay, so let me summarize the steps when we're trying to draw the graphs or see which curves are affected. When you read the question, you first draw the original graph. This is the easiest step. And you secondly decide which cost is this. And you may have two answers, right? If it's fixed cost, then which curves are affected? Well, average total cost curve is affected, right? Average fixed cost curve is affected, right? And if it's variable cost, and again, variable cost means it's changing with the quantity, right? Then average total cost is affected. And like I said, I already mentioned, average total cost will be affected regardless whatever cost you're changing, right? Average variable cost will be affected. And marginal costs, because marginal costs are also affected by quantity, right? So once you just sort of just summarize these steps, these type of problem becomes super easy to answer. But that is given that you can correctly identify which type of cost is the change, or is the change that we're asking you in the question, right? So maybe just do a little bit more practices, and I think usually it's very obvious. We usually ask you, maybe say it's a lump sum, then it means fixed, right? If it's run, it means fixed, right? But if it's labor, or if it's like tax by units, then that means it's gonna be variable. That means it's variable cost, right? So I think it's just it's gonna be easy if you can correctly identify whichever cost it is. But if you couldn't, that's gonna be a little bit hard. But we usually wouldn't trick you. We don't want to make you feel uncertain about, oh yeah, what is that type of cost, because we usually want to give you some very specific. This is like you know for sure. Oh yeah, this seems right. This seems like a fixed cost. Oh yeah, that seems like a variable cost. Because it doesn't make sense for us to trick you either. If we couldn't easily say, oh yeah, this cost must be whatever cost, right? And let me see if I want to cover a little bit more. I think that's so much for whatever you learn, right? And this week you learned lecture 14, but I'd rather cover lecture 14 next week, competitive market, or else I wouldn't have anything to cover. Yeah, I will stop here. And I would suggest you to do some more practices, because if I keep going on, I'm just going to give you, just keep giving examples and just showing you doing the same thing, that changing these cost curves, which you can do it on your own. You can just search, Google some practices on your own, Google some questions on your own to see, just to practice on your own to see if you know how to identify the cost. And I will stop here. And to those of you who are celebrating the upcoming holiday, happy holiday. And if you're not, enjoy the days off. I will see you next week.